Welcome to the EarthWorks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi again, everybody. Kevin Hicks coming to you with another EarthWorks podcast. We're going to mix it up a little bit this week and not have a guest. It's just going to be me reading some stories that listeners have contributed, and it should be kind of a fun format, but we will not have a guest on this week. It's just going to be me kind of narrating the stories that you all contributed and some of the things that I've witnessed over the course of my career, and I thought that might be kind of a fun little twist on what we normally would present to you on the podcast. So you might wonder how I came up with this idea. Well, it certainly wasn't an original one. The idea came about when I was listening to one of my favorite radio talk shows, and the host seldom invites callers, but when he does, he usually requires that you talk on a specific topic. On that particular day, the topic was to talk about the dumbest thing you ever wasted money on in your life. The ensuing calls were obviously hilarious, and it got me thinking about the potential of our industry and what we witness on a day-to-day basis with our staffs and golfers and members and so forth. The crazy stories started early in my career, as it has, I'm sure, for all of you, and at some point an assistant told me I should start keeping track of them. That started almost 30 years ago, and at this point it's a large enough volume of material that I can put a book together. Some of it couldn't be documented until I left my last superintendent position, as it would implicate both owners and other employees in some of the shenanigans that were witnessed, and I didn't want to lose my job. I haven't written the book yet, but I've even come up with a title, Asininity, The Art of Being Asinine, because if you've been in this business for any length of time, you'll be shaking your head in an affirming fashion at this point. Someday when I have more time on my hands, I'll definitely compile this into a humorous book that people will relate to in and out of the business of turf grass management. Plus, who wouldn't want to read a book with that title, right? The following is kind of a combination of excerpts from my manuscript and the contributions from friends and social media followers in the industry. I doubt I'll be able to keep my composure through this podcast, but I was told that might even make it better. We'll see. This is uncharted territory for me and for the EarthWorks team. But if it's successful, I may ask for more of you to contribute for episode number 2. I hope you enjoy this, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast and feel free to send your contributions in to me either via DM on my Twitter page at golfsuper1992 or email at kevin@soilfirst.com. Let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm just going to read through some of these contributions that came in, and I've also got my notes from my manuscript here to kind of interject if there's time. Understand that some of these obviously will be not G-rated. I'll keep them as G-rated as possible, but some of them just they need the language and the descriptiveness in order to really tell the story. So I kept all the names out of it. Had several people contribute content that said, "Hey, you can use my name if you want," but I think just to be on the safe side, we'll definitely just leave the names off. So with that, you might hear some paper shuffling because there were some great contributions, and I've got pages of them to read through. So hopefully we enjoy this. This happened to me at a municipal golf course in Iowa. Golfer hit his ball into the lake 3 different times and was extremely frustrated. He walked over to the water's edge, threw his golf clubs and golf cart in the water, and walked back to the clubhouse. He shortly thereafter turned around, walked back to the pond, got in the water, found his golf bag, pulled it to shore, pulled his car keys out of the bag, and threw his clubs back into the water. That's awesome. Here's another one from the Midwest. Had a guy scale a fence, get into a pond trying to steal the Otterbein fountain out of the pond. He unhooked it all from the anchors, drug it to shore, got it out of the pond, and couldn't steal it because the electric cable was buried through the wall, I presume from the pump house. During this whole process, he had taken off his clothes, so they didn't get wet, and got back in the pond several times to do this. When he left, he put his clothes back on and took off. Unbeknownst to him, his wallet fell out of his pocket. We figured out who it was, and the police arrested him for trespassing and trying to steal the fountain. Stupid criminals. I had a similar situation that kind of reminded me of one that happened to me when I was in southern Idaho. Turned out to be a woman, we found out later, had far too many drinks and tried to drive herself home. Unfortunately, her route was, she rerouted herself through our fence on the 11th hole. And after a circuitous route around the 11th and 12th holes, the tire tracks disappeared between two condos adjacent to the 12th hole. Went back to the scene of the crime and found a license plate had been ripped off the front of the car by the fence mesh. It turned out it was one of the residents of the condo after the police made the arrest. So that was kind of a fun one. Here's another one from, I can't remember where this one came from, but we had a member who was a psychologist. He had a mistress he called 99 and a wife. They both knew each other. One night after drinking heavily, 99 decided to go out onto the 10th green, and an employee sees them doing this in the twilight hours and calls the police. The police come out, confront them while they're in the midst of their activities. He gets up and says, "This is a private club and I'm a member here and I own this 10 by 10 piece of the golf green, so you're trespassing." The police did nothing and left the board of directors to suspend him for 30 days. That's a pretty good one. I don't know how he knew he owned that 10 by 10 piece, but pretty quick on his feet. I didn't post this in public, but I had an interview for an equipment manager's position. This was from a friend of mine in January and February. This one's great. With a local superintendent. Friday a.m. at like 9 o'clock. It was pretty clear the candidate was under the influence. He went on, this was, I think, on a Zoom call, by the way. He went on to tell us how he was the best MFing mechanic on God's green earth. Whenever we tried to get specifics, he told us, "I've effing forgotten more than you know. I tried to close the call, but the superintendent kept getting him going. I had to go off screen because he was laughing so hard. I wish I could have recorded it because it was an instant classic. I believe he told the superintendent at some point, to some degree, he could do his job if needed. The super will never, ever forget that as long as he lives." Here's another one. I had an employee, I won't give the nickname because he was a little worried he might actually hear this since he's still in the business, who called in sick and then came out and played golf. I drove past him on the 13th hole and fired him before he reached the green. This same employee also came up to us as we were towing in a fairway mower and actually said, "Yeah, it's broken." This superintendent wrote that he was interviewing a guy for an intern position who had zero experience, just finishing a 2-year course in turf management. When asked what he viewed as a good starting salary, the number was more than the superintendent's, and he had been in the game for almost 25 years. Another superintendent reported having irrigation issues, so he called his so-called irrigation guy and asked him if the pumps were on or off. His only reply was, "Yes." Another superintendent told a college kid to fertilize a pass around the bunkers. When he caught up with him with 3 bunkers to go, he was fertilizing inside the bunkers. Ironically, this individual starts law school in August. The superintendent wrote in that he had the same hot air balloon continue to use the course as a landing area after we told him to stop. He didn't listen, landed on a tee. Member texted me, and the superintendent immediately went out, turned on irrigation via radio, and watched them run like they were all on fire. Didn't help probably that it was only 40 degrees out. Here's another one who had a member put a cart in a lake with his dog tied to the steering wheel shaft. I'll bet there was some panic there. So I'll get back to this in my experience, but this one, I'll kind of set this up. I'm sure everybody's heard every excuse in the book, so to speak. But to take that a step further, what I did as a superintendent is because I was always writing down the ridiculous excuses that employees gave me for being late or absent or what have you. My policy was if you came up with an excuse that I hadn't heard before, you would get a free pass. Well, after 25 years of running golf courses, it became very difficult for employees to come up with new and creative excuses for not being there. This was one from a contributor. Had a guy tell me he was allergic to concrete one time. The second day of repairing golf cart paths. Of course, that's not easy work. Some guy said he had leukemia, but then he was cured 2 days later. There's all kinds of miracles, I think, that we've experienced. Those that say there aren't miracles haven't had a crew of 20 employees working for minimum wage, I think. So here's one under the category of you can't make this stuff up. Once worked with a guy who had been told to backpack blow cart paths by starting on 18 and going backwards. Thank goodness he didn't trip by the time we found him walking backwards on hole number 15. Of course, the cart paths remained covered in clippings and debris. Here's one that had a GM that he worked for. Marine layer came in every morning, and he asked me if I could remove the top 3 inches of bunker sand on the greenside bunkers in the afternoon and put it back in the AM so the bunkers would be dry. Shit you not, he says. I gave him a labor number. He decided against running that up the proverbial flagpole, but never heard about it again. How about this beauty? I once had the cops called on me. Homeowner accused me of buying bullfrogs and cicadas that kept her up all night. No joke. Cops were called for a noise complaint. That was not me, by the way. That was a contributor. Here's another one. I saw a superintendent have his intern hook up a quick coupler and made him fill up the irrigation pond. I replied, that's not nice. I had a prospective intern show up in January with a T-shirt, jeans, and flip-flops on. January in North Idaho isn't as warm as you might think. Naturally, I said, nice to meet you. Let's take a ride on the golf course, and I can show you around. He looked like a popsicle after an hour. So chalk this one up to creativity. I had a guy quit 4 hours into his first shift. He claimed he couldn't work during full moons because he was a werewolf. Okay, so this one is the first of 3 outstanding contributions from a superintendent in the Southeast. He should be a writer. The way he wrote these, I was absolutely in tears by the time. The last one I'll read today, I'm not going to make it through without laughing. This one is entitled, Be Right There. Had my first head superintendent job in the late 90s. It was a tour stop at a 4-course resort, and I hired a hotshot first assistant with a 4-year turf degree who's a top guy in our industry today. Pretty sure this was pre-cell phone. We used a walkie and beepers to communicate. It was a dark spring morning, and he was out to pre-water greens. I was mixing the spray rig with my interns. He calls on the radio, which is a resort-wide, asking me, must have been a resort-wide channel, asking me to come to the 14th right away. I was very intense about my sprays and asked him to elaborate, and he continues to be vague, but I can hear genuine concern in his voice. After a couple of volleys, he tells me over the resort-wide radio he thinks a small dog is trapped in an irrigation controller and he can't get it open. He's a brilliant dude from the Midwest, so Florida and a 20-year-old hydraulic irrigation system is new to him. He's genuinely distraught, but his practical nature knows a dog couldn't fit inside a closed irrigation box. I holler onto the radio that I'll be right there. I grab the equipment manager's wrecker cart with the flashing lights and 2 loaders with hazards blaring, and we rushed over in high gear to pull up. I hop off like my ass was on fire, rip the irrigation box sides off. It was still slightly dark, so I didn't get to see his reaction, but I did get to see his face when 8 barking tree frogs hopped out. That's pretty good. Here's one entitled The Honorary Club Pro Guy Entry, circa 2008. A player was spotted with, quote, streaks on hole number 5, covered in all over the Dockers. Seriously. Sure, he's going to quit after 9. Surprised he didn't after 5. Nope. Cleaned himself up as best he could in the clubhouse, made the turn, and finished on 18. This damn game. There's another one that had a neighbor call saying my gophers were eating her plants. I met with her and said I had no problem taking care of my gophers. I asked that the gophers all had red tags on their right ear. I said we tag all our gophers so we know that they're ours. She was at a complete loss for words. I had a situation similar to that where this was in Arizona where I had a lady on the 13th hole resident, and these houses were 150 yards off the fairway, so it really couldn't have been an issue to begin with, but she swore every time we had a sprayer out that she would break out in hives. And the mayor of the town that we were in was a member, and he was also on the board. And so he pulled me aside one morning and said, Mrs. Jones has called. She's called the city hall. She's called the GM of the club and complained. But I don't think there's any merit to it. What do you think? And we talked it through, and I told him it was primarily fertilizer we were spraying, but we kind of hatched this plan that we were just going to go out one morning and spray water. This is in the early 90s, so posting and things like that wasn't really an issue. So I called him ahead of time, and I told him, this Tuesday we're going to spray. And, sure as the sun rises every day, she called and was breaking out in hives, and it was a 300-gallon tank of water. So the mayor/board member called her and very nicely explained what we had done, and thankfully we never heard from her again. This is a quick one, but apparently, I think this was in California. Guy drove up on 2 homeless guys beating the crap out of each other with bunker rakes. He also had a member ask him if he knew what he was doing when they were out airifying greens. And he said, no, this is only the 50th time that I've done this, so I'm still trying to dial it in. I'm sure we've all had plenty of suggestions on bunker quality and sand depth and so forth. Here's one from a former assistant superintendent on Long Island. He had members complaining about the bunker sand getting wet when we irrigated, so one of the members, a doctor of course, asked very seriously if we could remove the sand from all the bunkers each time we irrigate and then replace it again in the mornings. Here's one from a former employee of mine who's relocated to Colorado. He's been out there for a number of years. They had just finished a bunker renovation, white sand just like we had at Coeur d'Alene. Had a guest on the driving range in the middle of July. Asked me, how do we still have snow on number 10? Struggling not to smile, he kindly said, it's this new sand in the bunkers, sir. I'm always glad to hear from former employees and interns, and just like the last story, I had another one from an intern that worked for me several years ago. Gosh, that's probably been 15 years ago. He relocated out to the East Coast in Maryland, and he was telling me this story. At his club, he was handcuffed at gunpoint by 6 Maryland state troopers along with 2 detectives outside the clubhouse. Earlier, I had fired off a bird banger at geese, and a resident called 911 saying I had a gun and was shooting it. I came back from lunch, and they were waiting for me, pulled me out of my car and ransacked it, demanded to know who was in charge, and he said he was because the superintendent was traveling. Made the mistake of laughing because I couldn't believe that it was happening. They didn't find it funny at all. Once they understood what happened, they let me go. Weeks later at a restaurant, 2 troopers saw me, and one whispered to the other, "That's the guy I was telling you about." All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and read you some of the ones that I've had through the years. So this one starts out. This was back in, the early 90s. I had a stoner on the crew that I don't think he was ever sober, but he walked up to me one of the first days I was there. I had just moved out from from Minnesota to Arizona, and he walks up and he goes, "Dude, you're from Minnesota, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, after about 6 months here, you'll be totally claustrophobic from the sun. And I had no idea what that meant, but it just sounded bizarre. And I remember about 4 months later, it was the middle of June, which is usually the hottest and the driest part of the summer. I looked up into the sky, just clear blue sky, and it was 110 degrees. And I remember just saying, just one cloud for 5 minutes over the sun, please. And that's when it dawned on me. That's exactly what he meant. Probably not exactly the way you'd want to say it, but once you've experienced it, you totally understand it. Any of you guys in the desert, I'm sure you'll relate to that. All right, so under the training fails category, here's one. I had a former employee. This was also in Arizona. Fairly long-term employee, a little guy, maybe 120 pounds, sopping wet. And I had sent him out with a new employee to teach him how to walk mow greens. These were the old Bunton greens mowers before John Deere took them over. And if you remember those, they had kind of a lever to engage the drive. And anyway, he had made his first turn, came back towards us, and I was kind of explaining a few things to the newbie, and his foot slipped out from under him, and he fell right to his stomach. Being small, mower began dragging him across the green as it was kind of doing a wheelie, and as he was being dragged, he couldn't reach the disengage lever, so it drug him nearly halfway across the green before he finally let go. And then I ran over and disengaged the mower. But man, that was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. That kid would not give up for anything. So if you remember a little earlier, I said that my policy was that if you came up with a unique excuse or one I had not heard before, that you would get a free pass for your absence or your tardiness. This is a list of a few of them that I had to write down. A note left on my assistant's desk read, "I'm taking the rest of the day off for frustration. I'll be in tomorrow unless you'd rather I didn't. Call if that's the case." Here's another one. Short, but to the point. He did not get a pass on this, by the way. It read, "Still ill, period. Must go hurl, period. Will call later, period." I don't think he ever did call again. Here's a good one. I didn't know this was an actual thing, but I'm not going to be in today. This is on the voicemail machine. I'm not going to be in today. I think I had a bad wing ding last night. So the same wing ding guy, about a month later, left me a voicemail. It said, "I must have caught some bad chicken last night. I'll try to be in tomorrow." Again, that was the same guy, so that did not earn him a pass. Here's one. "My girlfriend got in a car wreck last night, and they had to use the jaws of life to cut the roof of the car off. I'm not going to make it in today." How about this one? "I was all ready to come into work this morning, boss, but my roommate took my car last night and haven't seen him since. I'll try to call you later." This one definitely earned a pass. An employee came up to me with a panicked look on his face, and he said, "I have to leave early because my dogs got out and are attacking someone at a grocery store." Here was the follow-up conversation a couple days later. Same employee. "I went to court today, about my dogs. Anyway, the judge said I have to serve a day in jail, and they only give you a half hour to get to work after they let you out. So I might be just a little bit late in the morning." I think I did give him a pass for that one. So my last golf course is about 20 miles from the Washington state border, and you may or may not realize that marijuana was legalized several years back in that state, and so we had a lot of crossover employees from that would come across the border from Washington. One of my assistants was interviewing an applicant whose previous employer was a pot shop in Spokane called Smocan. During the interview, he asked him what he liked best about the job, and he replied he enjoyed helping customers, testing all of the products himself so he could better help customers with selecting the right products for their, quote, needs. He then asked what he liked least, to which he replied he didn't like being high all the time because it made him feel weird. He quit smoking pot and sobered up. The management quickly fired him because he was always acting strange. He also listed gymnastics coach on his resume and told my assistant that if he ever needed anyone to do a backflip, he was his man. Now that's a classic. Clearly, a lot of these employees don't really think through what they're about to say before they actually verbalize it. I had one guy look at me and said, hey, I'll only be in until lunch today. I have an appointment to put a lift kit in my truck this afternoon. Sometimes you just don't know how to respond to that stuff. I never thought I'd be working for, quote, the man. I was not the man, by the way. My car has an electrical leak, and I forgot to unhook the battery last night. The battery's dead, and I'll have to wait for my wife to come home. I'm not sure where she was because it was 9 o'clock in the morning. I know no-showed you last weekend, but I tried to call and you didn't answer, to which I replied, why didn't you leave a message? Employee's response was, I thought it would be better if I just came in on Monday and talked to you then. I terminated him on the spot. Here's a good one. As he's walking by me, I can't hardly understand him, but he looks at me. He says, I lost a contact and it's in my mouth. I have to go back to the shop. I also had a guy drive by me shaking his head. We had a shotgun that morning, and he was headed back towards the shop. And I said, is there something wrong with the mower? He was mowing greens. And he said, yeah, this one's just too fast. I'm going to go trade it out. Crazy. Had another employee, after 2 8-hour days in a row, he called in and said, I've been burning the candle at both ends. I need to give my body a rest. I'm going to take the next couple of days off. I told him to take all the time he needed. This was a good one. This guy, I think this was not the guy that worked in the pot shop, but I have a feeling he was a customer. He said, man, I would have made it in on time, but I had a headwind. He had lost his license, so he was riding his bike to work. But that earned him a free pass, actually. That was a pretty good one. One summer at my course in southern Idaho, there's a good chance he's listening, so I won't use his name, but he and another employee had kind of gotten locked up in some after-hours shenanigans and were getting themselves into trouble on a regular basis. And but then all of a sudden I noticed that their attendance had picked up quite a bit, and they were doing a great job. And I asked one of them, I said, you guys been partying a little bit less? And he looked at me very seriously and said, no, I haven't been drunk since I blew out my eye. If you had seen it, you'd know what he was talking about. But the good news is he's got his life straightened around, and he's a very successful superintendent now. And if you're listening, you know who you are. Now, I wouldn't have bought this one if I hadn't have seen him the next day, because this was pretty graphic and pretty brutal. But a guy he actually did come into work, and he said, he came up to me at the beginning of the day and said, I think I need to go to the doctor. I got hit in the head with a baseball bat at a bar last night. This guy had been brutalized. I don't know if the other guy looked as bad as he did, but I don't even know how he was standing, to be perfectly honest. And you get a lot of those rough guys that work for you, and that was definitely one of the worst ones I've seen. I did have another guy call in and say, I may not make it in today because I stuck an ice pick through my hand last night trying to break up some ice for our party. Here's a good one. Sorry for the language. Sorry I was late this morning, but I had to take a mean shit on the way to work and knew I wasn't going to make it to the shop. Again, no filter on some of these guys. It's amazing. Now that I work for EarthWorks, this probably hits a little too close to home, but I was a customer for a long time before I joined the company, and we had been spreading some 545, and one of the guys that was helping my assistant break the bags open and get them ready. As I drove up to check on him, he shook his head and looked at me in disgust, and he said, that fertilizer is so rank, it would knock the buzzards off a shit truck. I never told Joel that one, but I'm sure he's listening. I'm sure you enjoy that one. So that was a pretty good analysis of the product at that time. Here's another one that goes under the category of think before you speak. This did not end well for this employee. the voicemail said, "Yeah, this is Robert. I won't be in tomorrow because I'm going to be partying all day with my friends." I did call him back and tell him not to bother anymore. Yeah, I'm sure this guy isn't alive anymore, so I'll use his name. This was the same character who lost his footing underneath the Bunton Greens mower and got drug across the green. But he called one morning and said, "Hey, this is Jay. I'll be in a little late this morning. I'm not coming in until it cools down a bit." Arizona typically, like a lot of places in the country and in the world, gets warmer as the day goes on. So I did not give him a pass on that one. Had a guy, we ran two crews at my course in Coeur d'Alene, day crew and a night crew, and one of the stoners on the night crew asked me one time, "Does the night crew get dark glasses as well? You know, it takes 2 hours for your eyes to adjust to light changes, and since we work in the dark, we should also have dark glasses." Keep smoking that stuff and it'll kill you, man. So I don't see these very often anymore, but a lot of courses used to have what was called a time par clock, where if you teed off, for instance, at 8 a.m., if you stayed on time, when you got to the fourth tee, it would still say 8 a.m. When you got to the eighth tee, it would say 8 a.m. So you knew that you were on schedule. Had a guy call me, and actually he showed up 2 hours late, and was baffled when I asked him where he's been, and he said, "Oh man, I'm sorry, I synchronized my watch yesterday to the clock on the eighth tee. The time is totally off." I didn't give him a pass because he should have been 2 hours early and not 2 hours late, but that was a pretty good one. I had another guy call in. I think this was, I don't remember where this was. "I need the day off so I can go deer hunting with my mother-in-law." Had no money to take time off, but apparently his mother-in-law guided trips are worth the lost wages. Must be a pretty cool mother-in-law, actually. Here's one. If I wasn't in the right frame of mind, I probably would have lost my mind or thrown the keys on the desk. But after a full Saturday at work, preceded by a full week, I got a call from the pro shop. This is me personally. I got a call from the pro shop as soon as I arrived home that the owner's German Shepherds had taken a dump on the lower lawn, and he requested that I come pick it up. Me. I got back to the shop, unlocked the gate, unlocked the shop, got my card out, proceeded to go to the pro shop. There, I had 2 guest services fleas, the director of guest services, and a boat captain, and some kitchen help watch me scoop up the aforementioned German Shepherd poop. None of these folks were capable of picking up those piles themselves. I lost a lot of respect for the staff that day. That was a pretty enlightening day for me. Have you ever had an employee fire himself? Here's a couple of doozies. I had a guy walk into the office one morning after first job and sat down, and he even had an apologetic look on his face. And he kind of looked down, had his hat in his hand, literally, and he said, "Hey, Kevin, I'm just not working out like you wanted me to. I think I'm just not going to come in anymore." Believe it or not. Second one, this wasn't too long after the first one. He looked at me, he says, I need to work smarter, not harder. And then he filed for unemployment a week later. I'm sure a lot of you drag dew off fairways in the mornings with a couple of vehicles. We had a chain drag at a course I ran in Arizona. And one of my crew guys who had never done it before, unfortunately, and that's probably why we had issues, he was the only one available, so I grabbed him. He grabbed a Cushman. We went out and started dragging fairways, and got to the 16th hole. And if anybody's ever been to Desert Forest, you know there's a gigantic mesquite tree right in the middle of the fairway, and it's kind of a unwritten rule that when you're dragging and you get up to that tree, you go right each time. So when you come back the second pass towards the tee, you're still on the right side, but you're going to cover both sides. So he wasn't aware of that. I was trying to do hand signals as we were flying up the fairway towards the green. He got really confused at the last minute and just ran square into the tree. And you hear that saying, you wrapped your car or your cart around a tree, but this actually wrapped a Cushman around the tree. It was completely totaled. Luckily, it threw him and he wasn't hurt, but somehow I knew that was going to happen, and I still took him out with me. I know there's some things about turf management and golf course management that the average person just doesn't really realize, and maybe we take some of that stuff for granted, but here's one I sent. I had a little bit of time left in a day, and I sent 2 of the crew members out to hand water under trees, which usually dry out. Got a radio call about 20 minutes later. One of them asked if he needed to water the pine needle beds under the trees as well. No, that's not necessary. Yeah, you can file this one under, who do you think I am? We had a thunderstorm roll in one day, and at the first rumble of thunder, I got a call over the radio from one of the staff members who was actually in a turf management program at the time. I don't think he made it into the industry. But he asked on the radio after that first rumble, is that the only one, or will there be more? Again, who do you think I am? This story goes back a few years to the economic crash of 2008, and had an emergency meeting with the leadership team at the golf course I was running at the time, and the president of the company. We were a resort course. The president of the company, first thing out of his mouth, he says, "Okay, first thing, we've got to stop all unnecessary travel, like trade shows, conferences, etc." In the next sentence, without even realizing what he had asked, he said, "Now, how do we get people coming to the resort and pay the high dollar green fees?" Yeah, that's probably not going to happen, and it didn't. Next thing, in order to cut costs, he said, "What I'll need from each of you is a team roster list." I had it with me because I knew this was going to get pretty dicey. And he started going through the list, he said, and just going down through the roster, and he said, "Joe, yeah, I know him. He can stay. Tom, do I know him? Do we really need him?" I've never seen, either in a moment of clarity or in a moment of panic, I've never seen such poor management. And it was a lesson to me. This is less funny than maybe a lesson, but the lesson to me was make sure you get especially your key people, but try to get your staff in front of the decision makers, because if they get into a situation where they're up against the wall, they'll make some pretty dumb decisions like they did that day. And that was a very disappointing lesson for me. Okay, this is the final one. I'm going to try to read it word for word, because this was the same contributor from Florida that I said should be a writer. He's very creative. So he says, this is entitled, he actually gives titles to his stories, which I think is great. Adding insult to infamy. In 2006, I got my dream job, new construction. I was adamant about starting sprigs by April. That's what you do in the South, sprigging, probably Bermuda grass. We still didn't have power permitted, so we were basically hand watering by turning on laterals 24 hours a day and running pumps via generators. I was finishing my night shift in my new company truck on a beautiful weekend morning, and I was working my way up number 1, a downhill par 4, about 450. I had my dog Jake riding shotgun, a slightly used 18-pack of Bud Select, and my favorite Irish music show, who knew there was such a thing, blaring out my aftermarket stereo system. As I reached the tee boxes, I cut the wheel back downhill, left the door open, put it in neutral, I thought, like countless other times, left the driver's door open and hoofed it up the hill to turn on the multiple valves at the tees. Another productive shift about to be in the books. I could see the truck rolling slightly out of the side of my eye as I moved up the hill. At the first valve, I looked back, and my company truck was rolling down the middle of the fairway. It was then I realized I left it in drive. With the theme from Chariots of Fire filling the air, I sprung into full flight to save my career, the fresh sprigs on the greens, my dog Jake, and Oh yeah, the company truck. First the untied boots, then the unbelted shorts were shed by gravity. I eventually tossed the radio when I knew I couldn't call anyone for help. The white truck was like a bullet drive splitting the fairway. Luckily for me, there was a little rise in the landing area, which helped me make up some ground. With about $120 in from the green, I was closing fast. I reached the bed of the truck when the front tires entered the newly sprigged green. As I reached the driver's door, Jake was a hot mess and none too pleased with me. I managed to jam it into park as the front tires hit the back of the collar before a steep drop off to Highway 455. The abrupt stoppage caused my head to crash into the door jamb, and your hero went night-night for I'm not sure how long. I awoke in my holy boxers on the sodded collar with U2's It's a Beautiful Day playing on the radio and my man Jake licking my face. I slowly rose with hands on knees, feeling my heart wanting to jump out of my chest. U2 changed to Van Morrison's Bright Side of the Road. I eased the truck over to the second tee and thought no one saw it. Everyone has their fingers and claws, and I'll just keep this one to myself. As you can see, that never happened, and they even agreed to name the hole in my honor. As fate would have it, when the cards were printed, they even spelled my name wrong. I'll leave his name out, but thus adding insult to infamy, the ongoing story of my life, the end. Oh my gosh, that one is outstanding. Well, I think I'm going to wrap this one up, but hopefully you enjoyed the different format. I know there are a million more stories like this out there. So, again, if you want to reach out to me, Kevin at soilfirst.com or just DM me on my Twitter page at GolfSuper1992. I think we can easily make a series out of this because I know for every superintendent that's out there, you've got a crazy story or eight that you could share with me. I guess the point of this is, we get pretty wrapped up in our jobs. It's a very taxing and stressful career. But don't forget to kind of stop and laugh a little bit. There's some pretty funny stuff that happens along the way. So hopefully you enjoyed it. And I'm gonna leave you with one from a health department inspector that came out one time, and that particular inspection cost us about $85,000 in a not in a fine, but in a recommendation to put a wash rack system in instead of just dumping all of our rinsate into the ditch on the side of the road. But I thought he had some pretty good words of wisdom that we can pretty much live by. And the quote was very simply, "We want to leave a positive mark on the world, not a skid mark." So go out there and leave a positive mark on your worlds, and hope you really enjoyed this. Again, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and thanks for listening. Sorry I couldn't keep my composure, but some of these are pretty darn funny. Thanks for all the contributions too to everybody that threw in some stories, and keep them coming. I think there's plenty more of this stuff to share.